Hello and welcome back to Pixels with Purpose, where the code is fully typed, but it still doesn't compile. Hi, I'm Salma. I'm joined by Andreas, and we work at Nordcraft, and Pixels with Purpose is sponsored by Nordcraft, the world's first web development engine. Nordcraft combines a visual design tool with a powerful web framework, providing everything you need to craft extraordinary web apps and websites. That's how we built Nordcraft in Nordcraft. And today we are joined by Josh Goldberg, an open source developer, author of Learning TypeScript, published by O'Reilly. He's a Microsoft MVP and a TC39 invited expert. Welcome, Josh. It's so great to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you. Yes, it's one of the longer awaited episodes. We're going to go straight into it. Josh, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Who are you? Why are you famous?
Famous. I feel like this is a fun industry where it's so small that fame here means knowing a few dozen or 100 very fun, nice people, and that's about it. But hi, I'm Josh. I'm an open source developer, and I'm independent, which means instead of working for one particular company, like a Microsoft, for example, I work on my own, and I kind of float around the internet doing open source projects that I think are useful to the ecosystem and interesting to work on. The main one for a while that I've worked on is TypeScript ESLint, which is, we just switched the tagline actually. The pull request is in review from the tooling that allows ESLint and Prettier to support TypeScript to powerful static analysis tooling for JavaScript and TypeScript. Very exciting. But I also work on other projects like ESLint itself and Mocha. So I'm just kind of happy to contribute to the web ecosystem.
Interesting stuff. Lots and lots of tools that we'll get to later. And talking of tools, right, and linters, you recently wrote about your ideas for a new linter. Tell us about that. And more importantly, why do we need a new linter and why are linters so important?
Oh, what a great set of questions. Thank you for starting with high interest area. I'll try to answer those roughly one at a time in reverse order. Why are linters so important? Developers as a whole are kind of a contradictory sort. We really want tooling that helps us develop faster. We want to be told when we make mistakes, when we create a variable and forget to use it, when we accidentally make a condition that's always false when we didn't mean to. But we also hate when we are told we are wrong. Everyone hates the little red squigglies. You know, it's that kind of guttural reaction. Shut up, I know what I'm doing, VS Code. So linters are important, but it's really, really difficult to get them right. And I think that as we as an industry kind of learn and grow, it's important to continuously kind of learn from our mistakes and successes and see how we can make a tool that satisfies both the criteria of I need to tell you how to develop, especially if you're using AI that writes sloppy code, without getting in your way and being annoying about it. Does that sound reasonable as a first answer?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the duality. I think also most of us probably know that these tools are helpful even when we find them annoying. Like I remember just when TypeScript came out, it was such a big debate because there was, and to some degree there still are people on the fence, right? But a lot of the people on the fence was like, but it's telling me my code is bad and there's nothing wrong with it. And I felt that as well, but I also slowly realized that it's technically true, it did run, but if you changed it in a way that TypeScript understood it, it usually meant my teammates also understood it. Like it tended to be right in the long term.
Yeah. That's one of the really sharp lessons I think we've learned over the years, that the way you explain, the way you justify why TypeScript is yelling about something is very important. If you tell someone TypeScript will yell at you if your code is bad, well, then people are going to feel a little personally attacked there. But if you say TypeScript's type system represents how your code is intended, how it's meant to run. So if it's telling you that something is off, it might be a symptom that your code is confusing or convoluted or in a way that's kind of brittle and might break if you change it. That's a lot more empathetic of an explanation for why something might be giving you red squigglies.
Don't tell them the code is wrong. Tell them it's confusing and poorly written. Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Because wrong is subjective, right? There are many ways to do many things often. I completely agree with the fact that you mentioned that developers hate those red squigglies and they hate it because I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm going to get to. And some linters and formatters, they are too eager. And they break the code as you're writing it. And I turn them off. Don't want that. Maybe I'll add some linting functionality to when I commit or push, and then it can correct it afterwards. But sometimes it's like someone over your shoulder saying, no, you do it this way. Stop what you're doing. And you get out of flow, I think, sometimes with these overzealous tools.
Yeah. There are a few strategies we've kind of come to in the linting space to help with that. One is being much more aggressive about telling people that the linter is their tool. You create and configure the linter experience for yourself, not the other way around, which is a little different subtly than what it was, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We don't recommend often people use big, comprehensive lint configs like ESLint plugin Airbnb very often, because we found that when people get too much over-the-shoulder yelling, that, as you said, makes them not want to use the tool at all. It's one step forward, 3 steps back. Another thing that I've personally gotten excited about is figuring out how to make the linter warnings or complaints come across as a different severity. Because when you have a bunch of red squigglies, that's upsetting. But actually, there's a real important distinction between a linter, which checks for kind of, is this the right way to do it, versus the type checker. Can you literally get this to run? And I found actually a lot of people have a lot better experience when, in addition to turning off the rules you don't personally like, you switch your linter complaints to be the yellow squiggly instead of the red, just to help to distinguish them from TypeScript.
That brings us on to a very good next question, Andreas.
Yes. So let's talk about rules, and because linters is all about essentially creating rules for your projects and for your developers and having them enforce them, right? Why is that so important that we need whole tool sets just for that?
Great question. There are a bunch of different uses for linters. It's not all just in one category. So I will list some, and some may resonate with different people. For starters, a lot of frameworks have framework-specific needs. React hooks are kind of one of the bigger examples of that. Solid has an equivalent too. Basically, every major framework that I can think of, at least in front end and most of the back end ones, have some recommended set of lint rules that allow you to kind of get positive reinforcement or the carrot and the stick when using the framework. There's also a lot of just kind of weird stuff in JavaScript that makes linting particularly important for us. Like, you can use 2 to 4 different ways of looping over an array, and 2 to 3 of them are wrong in any given moment. So like using a for in loop over an array is something that your linter can, gently guide you away. Even if the code works, it's kind of weird. There's string coercion on the inside. It's a whole situation. And then lastly, I'd say for stylistic consistency, it can be very nice. Not everyone agrees with this. For example, I personally alphabetically sort everything because I like just having no mental overhead. If I want to find something, just log in, search. Most other people I've talked to think that's moronic and stupid and hate me for it. But there are a lot of good stylistic practices that you can enforce with a linter just so you don't have to think about it. Like using a type versus an interface in TypeScript. Just let the linter auto-fix it to whatever your project uses.
So you just said, so you don't have to think about it. But if you're doing it the wrong way and then the linter is screaming at you, then you do have to think about it. And I mean, I guess, so one of the things we spoke about before the podcast was education. And you kind of reinforced that you can use these types of tools and rules for education purposes to educate your entire team and to pass down better practices and stuff. So I guess that's kind of a good way to think about it if you do need to think about those different types of things that the linter is yelling at you for. But I would argue that perhaps you do need to think about it sometimes in certain situations.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. Sometimes you don't want to think about it. And the nice thing is that you can just have the linter fix things on save. I think a good example of that is sorting your imports. No one should ever have to manually move import lines up and down. But I totally agree. Yeah. And actually, that's another good point, that it's not just the big public frameworks like React or Next or whatnot that have, I want to teach users how to do this the right way and gently nudge them or fix their code when they do it wrong. Internal company frameworks. I've used lint rules to help migrate from one API in a design system to another, or from one style of declaring server endpoints to another. Which is actually, I think, another really good use case for lint rules as code mods. Because if you have a fixer, run that fixer on your code base. It both fixes it now and prevents people from messing up and regressing in the future.
That is another good cool segue. Case. So one of the things that you mentioned here is the configurability of the linter, right? And setting it up. And especially, you more and more recommend people don't use the big Airbnb and big sort of template projects. But what is the right level of enforcing a rule, right? Because it almost seems we have there's the individual level, which is just not having anything, let everybody do whatever they want, like have your own best practices. And then there's kind of a project, which is kind of what we do today with linters, right? Sometimes we share a config between teams and companies, but a lot of times I think these configs are on a project by project basis. And then you have, company and then even greater than that, like the Airbnb is arguably almost an industry standard. How much is used is sort of has gone up and down, right? But what is the right level, and how do you think about that? Because it seems like if a linter rule is useful for you and your project, why do I need a different one in my project?
Love it. I think there are kind of two general classifications of lint rules. Those that are so gosh darn useful that everyone should enable them. Most of those rules are pretty solidified at this point. It was still a little up in the air, say 10 years ago, but at this point we've learned, okay, most people want no floating promises, no foreign array, and so on. And then the second classification of rules is those that are subjective, that are determined by what you personally or what you as a group or team or organization want. And there used to be a lot blurrier of a line between them. So the older versions of Plugin Airbnb, for example, included a lot of little stylistic nitpicky rules that just turned a lot of people away from linting. These days, I think the general strategy I recommend is to have a recommended config from each of the major groups or entities that you work with. That could be the framework you're using, or it could just be the core ones, like the TypeScript ESLint rules for all TypeScript users. But it could also be, like if your web platform team at your company has a set of things they'd like to enforce for the company, have a set of rules there. But in general, I think that forcing people who don't actually want to mess with their linter for hours upon hours to mess with their linter is kind of a recipe for disaster. So the more that we can kind of standardize and shove rules into the recommended places to make it easier for people, the better it is for those people.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. It's something that I personally because I used to not be a big fan of linters in general, just because, can't we just talk about it? Just, don't do that thing, do that thing. And this was also in the early days before most of the auto-fixing came in. So the value was just, it shouts at you, right? Like that was all early, like the first JS lint. All it ever did was tell you were stupid, right? But I've much come around just because I feel like we spend so much time on decisions that don't make sense. So having a one set really just lets us get back to what we're supposed to focus on. So you wrote a blog post if you wrote a linter. What if you wrote a new programming language? So now you have a chance to start a community, right? You have to you get to control essentially everything about it, right? You go inside, am I going to be kebab casing, or what are we doing now? Are we like everything? How tight? Because you now have control. Like how narrow do you want to go? Can you only ever do this one thing this one way? Or how much freedom do you give your users in that sense? Do you think, is less more or is more?
Both and neither. That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah. That's what we're all about here in Pixels with Purpose, the hard questions. Yeah.
I think I would basically write JavaScript with the weird stuff fixed. I really like JavaScript. It's not perfect. I'm sure that there are legitimate reasons to prefer something else like Go or C# or whatnot. Beautiful languages, Rust. But I really like JavaScript. I love the language of the web. I love the flexibility and the freedom. What got me into coding as a fun thing rather than just as a career was that I could just throw some slop onto an HTML, JS situation and it just worked. So it would be JavaScript with null and not undefined, as in the two of them are just the same thing, not two different blank values. Some of the number stuff would be fixed. I don't know, a lot of little nitpicks, but I don't know. I'm not a super pie in the sky kind of remake the world kind of dude. I don't think about these things very often. I'm very practical. What's the one smallest step as possible we could make to get things a little better? So only one value for null or undefined is kind of my big answer there. So
you mentioned like the problems with JavaScript a couple of times now, and it seems like this is a bigger thing in the JavaScript ecosystem, like especially linting, and I think sort of also the different type of dev tools, etc. All the different things we have. It seems like it's much more complex ecosystem to navigate in JavaScript than almost anywhere else, right? It doesn't sound like they have the same conversations, at least to the same degree everywhere else.
Yeah, which is fantastic. That's great for us. I think most ecosystems are either so wild and wacky and older that it's really hard to wrangle them, like C and C++. I hear they might get modules eventually. Or they are relatively more locked down Not saying that's a bad thing, just as a different approach. Like, for example, the Java and C# or .NET ecosystems, they have a lot of really great stuff, but it's a lot more centralized. As a former C# developer, I do really miss having such a nice set of tools baked into the language plus the platform plus the recommended ways of doing things. And then on the other hand, you have JavaScript, which is one of the most decentralized mainstream programming languages. We don't even own the trademark to the name. We are constantly iterating and shifting and breaking things, which comes across as pain when users come back to their code 2 years later and half the libraries have been deprecated. But that deprecation, that pain is a result of us progressing and learning and doing, which is fantastic. So I really like how wild and wacky and Wild West this ecosystem is. I think we're learning a lot of stuff a lot more rapidly than we would have if we were a little more sedentary and a little more stable.
So you mentioned just then that some of the other programming languages, Java, etc., they're more locked down, more centralized in terms of their configurations and rules and standards. You are also the author of Create TypeScript App. And is that attempting to be that kind of centralized standard?
I apologize. My cat is screaming at the door. I will be right back.
Why did you have to ask that question?
Well, we could
clearly
edit
so
this
good.
bit out, but you know that you don't edit bits like this out, Andreas.
I edit out a lot of stuff, just not when you make mistakes, Selma, because it only happens every now and then. So
It's so exciting to see it happen,
The rest of us like mumble and say the same word twice in the sentence stuff, and you're almost always on point. So when you make a mistake, I make a point out of it.
I really, really appreciate you, my employer, putting me in the best light possible. Yes, Josh, Create TypeScript App. Is it attempting to be that standard?
It's attempting to make it so people can define the standard for themselves without having to go through the painstaking effort of learning everything that is involved in that decision. There's a lot of stuff in your ideal kind of perfect TypeScript setup where each person has their own different interpretation of that. There's the linter, the formatter, the unused detector. There are all the linter plugins. There's the test, and so on and so forth. So the problem is kind of twofold. One is that you want to give people a really nice starting template, but then you also want to allow them to make customizations or to upgrade over time. It's really 2 or 3 different problems. The first part of those, the making a template for people, is kind of a solved issue-ish. You have a lot of things back in the day, create React app, now create Vite app, create Next app, create Express app, and so on. But my problem there is that each of these things is kind of tailored to the specific framework. Create Next app doesn't really make it easy to, say, swap in Panda for your styling library. So I wanted to make a system that kind of allows you to define the individual blocks of tooling. The linter block, if you want to say swap from ESLint to Biome, you just swap out that block. And then also define how blocks can be not just swapped, but upgraded over time. Like let's say your linter switches its config format, you update to a new version of the template, and it kind of intelligently massages your config file for you. So yes, Create TypeScript App is kind of the implementation of that for TypeScript people, but there's a really, I think, exciting framework behind it called Bingo that allows you to define these things in a really ergonomic way, both for the kind of the template maintainer and the end user.
So edit that bit out, please. So Create TypeScript App, right? It allows you to configure, it allows you to make lots of different choices, and it allows you to swap things in and out based on what you're doing. But do you think sometimes that we maybe have too many choices? And is a lack of established standards like hurting people building stuff? Like I often, when I want to build something, I just want to build it. I want to get up and running. I don't want to have to make all these choices. Often when I'm using a CLI to set up a new type of app, I don't want all of these choices right now. I don't want to have to decide what type of linting I want, or what type of heavy, strict mode I want, or what type of site I'm building, and blah, 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 blah. I did actually run Create TypeScript App before we started recording, and the choices were few, but the things that it created for me, the files that it created for me, there were a bajillion.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I've got to go and learn all that stuff for this new project. And isn't that a little bit overwhelming? And do we have too many choices? And should we just not have choices and just say, look, Josh says this is how we do it like this now?
I'm curious, did you go with which preset did you go with when you created?
Common.
Okay, good. Because the everything preset is even worse in that regard.
I bet.
Surprise. Yeah, so as you alluded, there are presets. We can set things up for people. I think from a certain point of view, yeah, there are too many choices. If you just want to get started, it's hard. that sucks. That's just pain. There are a lot of startups, right, that, started on Ruby on Rails, just they do it everything for me framework. And that was the right choice at the time. And then 5-10 years later, have realized, oh no, that is no longer the right choice. Now we have to switch over, but everything was done for me. There's all this legacy corrupt in there that we can't really explain. I don't know that there's a good answer there. I think that the best we can do for now is to give people sensible defaults that kind of do it as simply as possible. And then long-term, try to simplify. That actually kind of ties nicely into my series of blog posts on if I wrote a linter. I think that there's a lot of stuff that I would want to do with linters to make them a little more ergonomic, easier for people to set up, use, understand. It's kind of really around simplifying. And long-term, I'm hoping to push that in linters like ESLint and my own experiment called Flint. But yeah, it's not great right now. I don't think anyone should pretend that we're just blissfully creating things and happy with the current setup experience.
So are you writing a linter?
Sort of. It's an experiment. I don't really want to maintain a linter. That's a lot. I'm on teams, and that alone is more than enough responsibility and dealing with angry users. But I want to test out a lot of ideas, like a cross-file cache, a cache that works with typed or cross-file dependencies, a linter that has a really rich CLI, but also like a really nice straightforward CI reporting experience. Like all these different things that are kind of hard to prototype in existing linters, but much easier if you just do it yourself.
So one thing, because you touched on this idea, like with the ecosystem we have in JavaScript and the sort of contrast to, let's say, .NET, right? The Microsoft stack and especially Rails as well. And I think Laravel is the newest hotness on the, we actually made all the choices so you can focus on building stuff. Type framework, right? And I very much agree. I find that the at least personally, the need to change technology all the time and pick one meant I got a lot more engaged in that. I learned a lot, and I feel like the whole industry learned a lot. But at the same time, the trade-offs are also there, right? And one of the things I especially noticed is that cross-tool integration seems to be something that we're lacking a lot in our system compared to like if you're looking at if you're building the Microsoft stack, it's not just that, the .NET framework itself is quite coherent. It's also the way it integrates into your editor, the way it works with your cloud provider, the way it works with everything. Like there is just something there when you have a holistic approach to these things that we've never really had in the JavaScript.
Yeah. But at the same time, things age. So is it better to have one framework or one ideology that slowly grows older and then you need to have hard breaks as you move to newer things or newer versions of that? Or is it better to have little breaks along the way and continuously upgrade your ecosystem? I was working at Microsoft when Windows Phone 10 came out. And let me tell you, that was not a great time for the .NET ecosystem. Not specific to Windows Phone, just there were a lot of shakeups. They couldn't figure out the .NET Core strategy. The .NET we were working with today, for example, is completely different than the .NET we were working with 10 years ago. Things like WPF are just wholly different at best. Nowadays, by the way, I'll shout out like the .NET ecosystem is a lot more tailored. There are things like Aspire that are making it a lot easier. And as you said, like Laravel with PHP is great. But 10 years ago, we had the same situations. People were writing, let's say, like WordPress or Drupal sites, and they were using the frameworks then. And those frameworks worked great and did a lot of stuff for you. But then you had huge breaking changes or difficulties between versions as the frameworks learned better and better ways of doing things. So like you said, I think it's a trade-off. And I'm just happy to be in the ecosystem that matches my kind of wild and wacky and wild west persona and preferences.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've slowly turned in the recent years because I always loved picking out the frameworks. And I don't know if I ever did two projects that had the same tech stack. I don't think I have ever. But I'm also recognizing that that's probably not a healthy sign, right? That's probably not a good thing. You've never done two projects with the same tech stack. I recently had this sort of experience of trying to build an NPM package and realizing that I don't even know where to start. Like, I don't even know what the first step should be. Because I know that we have ESM modules now, but I don't know, should I still be building for CommonJS? Should I, surely require can't be relevant anymore, right? Is there still some percentage that I need to compile it to a interdependent module standard? Like, is there a package for create NPM package? So I realized that the first step for me to create just a package, like for a simple one file package I shared on NPM, the first project, if I wanted to do it in TypeScript, which I did, would be to try and learn how to make an NPM package over again. And I think I've done like 30 open source packages in my career. But I realized I had no idea how to do it anymore, right? And I mean, me spending 20 minutes on doing that is not the end of the world. But I did have this feeling of like, it became a bit of a blocker for what should have been a quick, easy, let's do this thing, right?
So if I'm hearing it right, you wanted what could be colloquially referred to as create NPM package, but you also are a TypeScript developer. So it's like you wanted some sort of create TypeScript application.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nobody writes JavaScript anymore, right?
ESLint, fun fact, is written in JavaScript and will continue to be written in JavaScript for the foreseeable future. It's not that they hate TypeScript, it's that they are dogfooding their own parser and they want to make sure that the core works well. And as much as I love TypeScript, I recognize not everyone prefers it, and it's not always the right technical decision. Which is, by the way, actually one of the fun facts that I think it's sometimes okay to delete your ESLint config. If it's just really not working for you, if it's a short-lived project, if you just hate it, it is okay to delete that. And I think a lot of people struggle with feeling okay with that decision.
Thank you for validating my choices in life.
I think, at least if you're an experienced developer, most of what ESLint does for you, as if you're an experienced developer working on a solo project, like a lot of what it does is normalize decisions across teams, right? Across your team, you don't get the full experience as a single person using the linter, right? You don't get the full bang for buck.
Yeah, yes and no. I agree. It is less useful. Strongly agree. It's less useful because there's just a lot of use that applies to cross-person collaboration. But there's a lot of use still, I think, in the lint rules just as a convenience. I personally am particularly excited within typed linting, using type information to augment lint rules. That's kind of my area of focus. There are several rules there that I've found to be supremely useful when I'm working in areas of code that work with them. I referenced for in array earlier. That's a big one that, yeah, you're right. Experienced developers don't often make that mistake. But if you refactor code, it's nice to have something to make sure you didn't change something that 3 files away is now wrong. And then there's kind of asynchronous code, like the no floating promises, no misused promises, await tenable area of rules that are just so useful. Even if you never mess that up yourself, just for refactors or for, like sanity checks, as we say. I find them to be still really useful on my solo projects. I still use create TypeScript app everything when I'm writing solo.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think I would as well, because I would not want to set it up myself. No, that's much too much time. Great. So I have a big open question for my last one, which is, it's an easy one. What do you think the future of developer tools look like? Do we have all the right ideas, but we're just iterating? Or if you don't have to be held back by the practicality of switching, let's say, similar to where you're building your own language, what does the future developer tool look like? What can they do that we can't today?
They can cache intelligently. How far in the future are we talking here? 5 years, 50 years?
50 years has almost no value to anyone. Yeah. It's the flying car that comes around and fixes your bugs, right? Let's say 5 years.
Okay. I think AI will have passed from the peak of inflated expectations towards the trough of disillusionment. I'm so excited for that. This current hype cycle is so annoying.
Agreeing, chef's kiss. Thank you for saying that. Can't wait.
Can't wait. Yeah, I think people will still be using AI, but it'll be toned down a lot. It'll be much more akin to kind of the Stack Overflow onboarding cycle, where people at first just copy pasted everything, and now they're a little more intentional. They actually read through. I think tools like the type checker, the linter, the formatter will be still very prevalent. I think people will generally have a better understanding of them because they'll do better at explaining themselves. I think the linter will be a lot more powerful, and it'll be generally understood that if you are writing code, you should use a linter if it's not just very quick prototypes, or more understood than it is now. I think it'll be either ESLint or some equivalent to ESLint that's very popular that coordinates linting with type information and a cross-file cache and more support for code mods, kind of the stuff I was talking about in my blog post. I don't think it'll be extremely different, but I think it'll be simpler and more powerful. I think things like require versus import and stuff like that will be more of a thing in the past, and there will still be an annoyingly large number of questions that you have to answer when setting up a project, but there will be fewer of them, and there'll be better tools like Create TypeScript App to help you kind of bypass having to learn everything. Jazz hands.
What if there was no configuration that you had to do? What if there was just one way? This is how you build stuff now. It gets all of that stuff out of the way. It lets you get on with building it. It doesn't ask you any questions that you have to obsess over. Because what if you make the wrong decision and it just works? What about that kind of future?
We don't have the luxury of living in an ecosystem where there is one correct way. Almost no one does. To use .NET as an example for fun, there's no one good way in .NET either. there's not a set of configs that works for both, let's say, a Xamarin app and an ASP.NET server. That's just a wholly different experience. And then JavaScript, not only are we super decentralized and fragmented in the creators, and honestly kind of underfunded, which is I think part of why the docs often are bad, we are also the widest, perhaps, target range of any ecosystem. We support React Native and React and Next and Express and all these different types of use cases. You can legitimately have a half dozen different styles of deployment targets: mobile phone, e-reader, website, and so on. It's just not possible to make one config. We can deduplicate as much as possible in that config. We can, make TypeScript strict settings as an umbrella. You can have linter plugins and presets like recommended or strict within your plugins. But at the end of the day, it's building blocks that you have to put together for your specific weird use case that no one has ever seen before. Oh, I would love to live in an ecosystem with one config. Oh my God. Chef's kiss. That would just be so much fun. But then
This is how you build. Yeah.
I get that as someone who builds the linter. I see the appeal for sure.
People shut up about no floating promises. Just let me turn it on.
As a user, I don't ever want to live in an ecosystem with just one way of doing it. I think that sounds like a nightmare. I think we're overshot by a few orders of magnitude in the JavaScript world, perhaps. Like, I like that they're available, but I think we're probably still too much in the Wild West of saying every project is unique, which in reality, we know it's not. Most projects are not unique. Most projects, there's no reason why those two have different linter configs or build tools or choice of CSS framework for that matter. They essentially are supposed to serve the same. So I think maybe the happy path is somewhere in between one and infinite, which are the two extremes available to us today.
Somewhere in that number
Somewhere
range.
in that narrow range, which I think infinite is the current best guess for JavaScript, right? Nice. Selma, do you have any more questions? Because we went through all the lists we have.
I have no further questions.
I have one.
Go on.
What is the name of your cat? Because we need it for the title.
Jerry.
Yeah, when Jerry has this much screen time, we are like contracted and obliged to put them in the title. Excellent.
Do you have a mouse called Tom?
No, that comes up once in a while. We named him after the characters in Parks and Rec and Rick and Morty because he's kind of a bumbling buffoon.
Brilliant. And what are Jerry's thoughts on your new linter?
He's happy that I'm spending more time sitting so that he can bother me, but he's a little annoyed about how I don't really give him a lot of attention during it. I've been kind of engrossed in it. So pros and cons, I'd say.
Well, Josh, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about all the work you've done and linters and the importance of having some sort of rules in your project when you live in the lawless world of JavaScript or TypeScript for that matter. Yeah. So where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Well, I would love that. Please do reach out. I love talking about this stuff, and even just seeing other people's reactions is really useful to me. I'm joshuakgoldberg.com on all the platforms, LinkedIn excluded. So Blue Sky, my Mastodon server is Fostodon. I don't really use X that much, but I will eventually see your messages there. .com is the website. If you're in the Boston area, find me at Boston TS Club once a month. And I'm one of the organizers and founders of SquiggleConf. So you can find me there in September, conference for web dev tooling, where we talk about all this juicy stuff. And in general, on GitHub, I'm Joshua K. Goldberg.
Awesome. We will link all of that, or at least as much of it as we can find, in the description. Any last words, Selma? How do you want to close this off? Do you have something prepared?
No. Why? I'm normally the one who does this to you. I will quote something I shared with Andreas earlier from motivational quote I saw today. The quieter you are, the more you can hear. And we'll see you next time on Pixels with Purpose.